So we're taking your calls at 855-236-3228, 855-236-3228. Richard in Orlando, Florida, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Richard.
So in 2016, we saw President Trump just absolutely spank Hillary in the debates. I mean, because he's arguably the funniest political comedian of all time. But my question is, do you think if he goes toe-to-toe with Sanders in the debates and pummels him even harder than he did Hillary in 2016, will Democrats seek to have him charged with elder abuse, a hate crime because Sanders is Jewish, or both?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is all of the above, right? I mean, it'll be presumably the Jewish thing because they think that they have room to run there. The irony of that is that Bernie Sanders, claiming that he is reinvigorated with his Jewish heritage is just an absurdity on its face. I mean, this is a person who not only was warm toward the Soviet Union at a time when the Soviet Union was banning Jews from leaving, half of his campaign surrogates are open anti-Semites. Linda Sarsour, who is one of his campaign surrogates, yesterday literally is on tape saying that Palestinians' mistake is treating Israelis like human beings. They should stop humanizing Israelis, which is basically a call for the killing of Jews. And she's a campaign surrogate for Bernie. Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib are campaign surrogates for Bernie. So, Bernie playing the Jewish card against Trump, I don't think that has any legs at all. But you're right. I mean, the problem for Bernie, as opposed to somebody like Kamala Harris or Cory Booker or somebody who actually has real minority standing, or, a Native American like Elizabeth Warren, is going to be very hard for Bernie to claim victimization at Trump's hands. Now, the thing that is a little bit different from Trump and Bernie versus the Trump-Hillary dynamic is that Bernie is grumpy and Bernie is irascible and Bernie is rude. And so I don't think he's going to sit there and try and play sort of above the fray the way that Hillary Clinton did. It'll be down in the mud between Trump and Sanders. The difference is that Sanders is in the communist mud. That's a lot worse than anything Trump has ever done politically. So, yeah, I don't think that Sanders claiming victimization at Trump's hands is going to have any play at all, Richard.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just, I was surprised after 2016 that they let Trump smack a woman on TV for so long. I figured they wouldn't stand for it if he was doing it to an elderly old man.
Well, again, I know we're speaking figuratively, but just for Media Matters, no one is in favor of hitting women. Richard, really appreciate the call. Ari in Stamford, Connecticut, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Ari.
Hey, Ben, thanks for taking my call. Big fan. I just saw a poll that small business owners, that out of all the Democratic candidates, that Mike Bloomberg would be the one to beat Donald Trump. Is there anything to worry about Bloomberg? I mean, does he actually have any sort of chance even to win the primary or beat Trump in that case?
I think very unlikely that Bloomberg wins the primary simply because in order for him to do so, he basically has to split enough votes with Bernie so that he wins a plurality. The chances that he wins an outright majority in the primaries are very low considering that he's basically boycotting all the primaries until you get to Super Tuesday, which means he's even boycotting South Carolina. Right now, if you're Bloomberg, you're thinking to yourself, that was a mistake. Maybe I should have jumped in South Carolina, maybe done some damage to Bernie in South Carolina. Believe it or not, according to Quinnipiac, Bloomberg is actually outpolling Bernie among black voters. As far as whether Bloomberg would have a chance against Trump, I think he'd have a better chance than Bernie would against Trump, mainly because he doesn't hate capitalism. I think that the obvious line for Trump to take against Bernie is, you like this economy? Well, you don't get to keep this economy if Bernie is elected president, which is 100% true. Bloomberg, for all of the talk about how much Bloomberg is a regulatory maven and loves just banning soda and guns and all this stuff, he's not going to be able to ban soda or guns with a Republican Congress, with a Republican Senate. And also, at least he doesn't have a sort of knee-jerk hatred for capitalism. I mean, the man is the 9th richest person on planet Earth. He is not going to threaten the economy in the same way, so that line is not going to work the same way it would for Trump. Trump is going to make Sanders the issue. I mean, and Sanders will be the issue, deservedly so, because everybody has priced in Trump at this point. So this is why I always said that Biden was not bad against Trump in general simply because he's a dead person. And that is the best person that the Democrats could run, is basically an inanimate object. But Bloomberg is fairly close to that. The same is not true for Bernie. Bernie running against Trump, I think the conventional wisdom is probably correct about this, that while, I hate the idea of a communist even having any shot at the presidency at all, he is definitely the most vulnerable against Trump, considering that, again, I don't think the American people are ready to revoke capitalism as a whole at this point, no matter what an octogenarian socialist loonbag who's never done anything useful in his entire life has to say.
Got it. Well, thanks, Ben. I appreciate that.
I appreciate the call. Thanks so much. Andy in Tucson, Arizona, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Andy.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for taking my call. I had two questions about an article I read in Arizona Public Media regarding a 2016 law we passed here in Arizona to prevent the collecting of mail-in ballots, which is very important to us here because almost 70% of our ballots collected in 2018 were mail-in ballots. And the Ninth Circuit Court has overturned this law on the grounds of discrimination. So wanted to know, how is this discriminatory, and doesn't this set a national precedent? And the fact that anybody collecting a mail-in ballot, doesn't that jeopardize the validity of the ballot?
I hate ballot harvesting. I think ballot harvesting is garbage. The idea that you're supposed to go door to door to specific people who you know are voting for your party, and then you just grab the ballots. First of all, I think it's a recipe for voter fraud, because let's say that you are paying volunteers to do this sort of thing at a certain rate an hour. Now, those people are obviously biased toward a particular point of view. Let's say that you run out of people in your precinct who are voting for a particular candidate. So you just move on to another precinct and you pick up ballots that have not necessarily been filled in or haven't been filled in at the top of the ticket. It's not done in bipartisan fashion. So I hate ballot harvesting. But by the way, I also think that the generalized attitude, which is that we need to make voting easier, I disagree with this. I don't think we should put obstacles in the way of voting, but I think that it's a good thing that you have to go down to your local ballot box and you have to vote. I mean, I think that making voting easier online, all it does is it lowers the barrier of entry for people who are not invested in politics at all and who are following this stuff the way they would follow American Idol. I don't think people should vote like that. I think they should seriously consider how they vote. I think that they should have to take time out of their day to do so. And I think that's a good thing. Harvesting ballots seems to me one of the more corrupt things that you can do in American politics. And frankly, I'm shocked that folks on both sides of the aisle seem not to be more upset about ballot harvesting, which again, really is more about the organizational turnout of your volunteer squad than it is about how many votes are actually out there, because now you've actually set a non-even playing field. Let's say that you're in a precinct where Democrats have hired 10 people to go gather ballots and Republicans have hired 5 people to gather ballots, and you're sitting at home waiting for somebody to gather your ballot, but you're a Republican and not as many people are out gathering ballots. So now you've got a fully filled out ballot. You were counting on somebody to show up at your door to pick up that ballot, and nobody's doing so. Like, is this a good idea? Now it's really about not even turnout efforts, but how many cars you have canvassing the neighborhood. I think it's a terrible idea. I think the Ninth Circuit is ridiculous. I think that there is nothing in the Constitution that suggests that ballot harvesting is mandatory under the Constitution. That's absurdity on its face. Andy, really appreciate the call. Gavin in South Carolina, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Gavin.
So as the results from the Iowa caucuses were obviously controversial, what are your thoughts on the implementation of internet polling versus traditional booth voting? And do you think it could have an impact on the 2020 election?
So I think that internet polling is generally a bad idea for all the reasons I just outlined. I think that most people are able to click on an app and flip a switch, and I guess it makes voting more plentiful. But again, it lowers the barrier for voting. Also, it tends to bias in favor specifically of younger voters who can't be bothered to go vote normally. I'm very much in favor, again, of traditional voting booths. You should have to go. You should have to do your public service. You should have to do your duty. Go over to the voting booth, wait in line, get the dumbest sticker, do all of those things. Also, the internet is easily hackable, as we saw in Iowa. These apps do not work the way they are supposed to very often. And you worry about Russian interference in the election. Wait until we're not using traditional voting booths. Wait until there's one app that if the Chinese hack it, they can now control American elections. You want election security to go down dramatically, Gavin. Seems to me that internet polling is the best way to do that.
Thank you. I agree. Thank you for taking my call.
Well, Kevin, I really appreciate it. Christian in Los Angeles, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Christian.
I had a couple questions, same question kind of in two subjects, for healthcare and for the Second Amendment. I haven't been up to date on those two in a while. Primarily my argument for the Second Amendment is to keep it. And I'm all for all sorts of weapons that we may keep. But a lot of the times it comes up, why do we need to keep larger weapons, like with automatic magazines and whatnot? And I say my typical defense against that is that it's just in our Constitution for years now. I mean, why would that need to change? Although I can see that is something that, I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean,
I would like a better defense against.
Sure. So the typical defense given in favor of the Second Amendment is the original rationale of the Second Amendment, which is to dissuade the government from tyranny. And by the way, one of the signs of tyranny is the government coming to take your guns. The founders always foresaw that an armed population would be the greatest check against a government coming to do you harm and coming to violate your rights. And historically speaking, Martin Luther King owned a gun. The reason he owned a gun is because he was very much afraid of people harming his family. Traditionally, dispossessed populations have been disarmed before the dispossession, specifically in order to lower the risk of tyranny. So having rifles available to do just that makes a lot of sense. Now, again, the goal isn't to actually use those things. The goal is to dissuade people from actually attempting tyranny in the first place. It's a deterrence effort, right? The reason that the United States has nuclear weapons is not because we ever want to use nuclear weapons. It's to prevent anybody else from using nuclear weapons against us. Well, the reason that you have an armed population is to raise the possibility to raise the cost of a possible tyrannical imposition by saying, okay, listen, if you try this, there will be a cost to this. That's why Joe Biden idiotically suggested the other day, well, if there were ever a conflict between the U.S. government and the American population, rifles wouldn't do it. Well, again, that is not really the goal. First of all, it's not true. I mean, we've seen in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, we've seen in Iraq that insurgencies armed with rifles can do an awful lot of damage. But beyond that, the general idea is people should have to think twice before they violate deeply held rights in the United States. And one of those deeply held rights is, in fact, the ability to defend yourself and your property from violation of those rights, not just by the government, by other people who are coming to do you harm, which obviously is something that happens. Most people in the United States who own rifles are doing so, at least in part, for reasons of self-defense. Right? I own a shotgun, a long gun, for purposes of self-defense. So handguns, it would be weird to argue. Also, it's also very weird that people on the left are constantly arguing about why handguns should be legal, but rifles should not be legal. Far more people in the United States are murdered with handguns than rifles. It is not a close call. Yeah, so if they're going to call for a ban on guns, really what they should be doing is calling for a ban on handguns rather than a ban on rifles. But they're not willing to do that because they recognize that a lot of people own handguns and it would be nearly impossible to disarm all of them. So they start with rifles instead because rifles look scary and military as opposed to handguns, even though handguns do far more damage on a daily basis in the hands of the wrong people in the United States than rifles do. Christian, really appreciate your call. Josh in Washington State, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Josh.
Hey, Ben, how's it going? Longtime fan. And I just want to get your thoughts on the federal government basically suing King County over King County not allowing ICE to deport illegal aliens at a Boeing field. Currently, ICE has to transport illegal aliens over 150 miles to Yakima. Is this going to basically set a precedent for the federal government suing different cities and counties and municipal areas in the future? What is this? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that wouldn't be a surprise. We've seen this sort of state versus federal lawsuit before, most prominently actually with regard to drug law, right? There's a whole federal lawsuit against the state of California over marijuana legalization in a case called Raich versus California. The federal government suing King County for basically being a sanctuary city, I would not be surprised if this becomes precedent. And frankly, the federal government does have precedents in this particular area. I mean, just for folks who have missed the story, there's a flight ban which went into effect last spring because King County Executive Dow Constantine signed an order to renegotiate leases on land that flight operators used, and it prompted ICE to use an airport in Yakima, and the move was operating an additional cost to drive detainees the 150-mile trip to Yakima. So U.S. Attorney William Hyslop, this is all according to mynorthwest.com, explained in a news conference on Monday, the detainees being transported have been deemed a risk to the community's safety or have been previously deported. He says, this is illegal immigration. It's prohibited by federal law. You cannot bar us from using the airport in this way. So that is, I would not be surprised if the Trump administration particularly starts doing this. And frankly, they should, because there is the concept of federal supremacy in areas that the federal government occupies when it comes to immigration law. It is one thing for the state to say we are not going to become a tool of your immigration policy. That is perfectly plausible, and you can say that. It's another thing to bar ICE from actually doing its job inside your own state. That is a totally different thing, Josh.
Also, one more thing. A buddy of mine sent me a text last night about the CBP operating the Border Patrol on Native American burial lands. The federal government has been consulting farmers and landowners about this for the past couple months now. Do you think they should treat the Native Americans any differently with consultation, or do you think they should try and move around it? What are your thoughts on the border wall going to the burial sites?
Well, I mean, I actually don't know enough about the treaty stipulations between the Native American sites, the Native American tribes that have control over the land, and the U.S. government, because these are considered, they're sort of in a weird gray area. Because these are sovereign tribal lands. And so you actually have to negotiate with the individual tribe over all of this. And that's very different from the federal government simply sort of deciding the rules on Native American tribal territory. So I'd actually want to check that out before I give you an answer. I just don't know enough about it, Josh. Really appreciate the call. Zachary in Wisconsin, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Zachary.
Hey, Ben. I was just wondering what your position was on legalizing prostitution.
So my general position on legalizing prostitution is that we already have laws on the books that bar trafficking in women and abuse of women. And I'm not sure that you have to have laws that specifically target voluntary consensual exchange of sex for money. Now, I think that that's horrible and disgusting. I think it's inherently exploitative of women. I think it's bad for men. I think it's horrible for women and all the rest. But I do not think that the government generally has a role in consensual exchange that is actually consensual, I think we as a culture ought to fight against it. I think we as a culture ought to say this is gross and bad. I think we ought to have social stigmas that attach to utilizing prostitution. I think there can be local zoning ordinances, for example, that don't allow you to open a whorehouse in town. I think all of that is perfectly appropriate. But the idea of there being criminal penalties for trading sex for money, if there's a contract signed or something, like I don't think that that's necessarily the government's ability to get involved. Again, I think there are ways to sort of prevent it from infiltrating your neighborhood. That's what zoning regulations are for. I think there are rules on the books that prevent victimization of women, or should. And so I'm not sure that the broad-based policy of banning prostitution actually achieves what it is seeking to achieve. I will say that, Zachary.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I appreciate your call. Okay, let's take one more. Leonce in Columbus, Ohio. You're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Leonce.
Hi, yes. I'm glad that you're able to take my call, Ben. I have to tell you that I really like you as a person, but I disagree with you a lot on policy.
Sure.
And particularly, I don't understand why you're against identity politics when it comes to African Americans. When people on the right often cite things like anti-Semitism, they call Ilhan Omar anti-Semitic for saying that it was all about the Benjamins. I don't see how that is inherently anti-Semitic, the same way that you and other people on the right would say that the things that Donald Trump says about Haitian cultures is inherently anti-Black.
Okay, so their anti-Semitism is a kind of weird breed, Leonce, in the sense that the rips on Jews are very often not connected with ethnicity. Sometimes there's sort of religious anti-Semitism, Judaism being a so-called gutter religion, according to Louis Farrakhan, being an example of that, or rips on Jews culturally. So Judaism is sort of, anti-Semitism and racism are not completely equivalent, just because the definition of Jews encompasses both, it encompasses ethnicity, it also encompasses religion and culture, so it's kind of broader. As far as Trump ripping on quote-unquote Haitian culture, like when he said that, I assume you're talking about the bleep holes comment, for example?
Yes.
When he said that certain countries are bleep holes. So yes. It's not inherently racist to suggest that certain countries are less well run than others. I mean, I think we can agree that some countries are less well run than others. If President said Black people create places that are bleep holes, that would be racist, right? That would be an openly racist statement. If he says that Haiti is kind of a bleep hole, well, I mean, frankly, I think California is kind of a bleep hole, and I live here, so it sort of depends on how it's being put. I think there are people who have made racist comments. I think that there are some things that Trump has said that are borderline racist, maybe even crossing over into that area. I don't really see saying that Haiti is kind of a bleep hole to live in, for example, as a racist take. I also don't see that saying like Baltimore is rat infested is racist, because Baltimore does have a rat problem. There are white areas that have rat problems too, Leonce.
Right. What about the anti-Semitism of Ilhan Omar? That comment, is that inherently anti-Semitic?
Well, she's, as I say, so the kind of rip on Ilhan Omar with regard to this is that there is a long-standing stereotype of Jews, that Jews are perverting American institutions using Jewish money. And so when she says that American support for Israel is all about the Benjamins, and then she explicitly references a Jewish group that is supposedly using its money to influence politics, that plays into a generalized stereotype about Jews, in the same way that saying that, if you said that Black people create bad cultures, right, then that would be a racist thing to say. So that would be sort of the equivalent there.
Gotcha. Okay, Ben, I guess I have to get off the phone. I just think that those are kind of synonymous with each other, where they both are inherently racist or anti-Semitic.
Well, I definitely appreciate the critique. And Leonce, thanks so much for listening. I appreciate the call, especially since you disagree so often. I really appreciate it.